I'd like to call this special session of the Timberlane Regional School Budget Committee to order. Would the clerk please read the roll?
Alan David.
Here.
Eileen Doobie.
Here.
Lee Doobie.
Here.
David Gerns.
Here.
Dan Guide.
Here.
Julie Hammond.
Here.
John Hughes.
Here.
Michael Mascola.
Here.
Sean O'Neill.
Here.
Jim Paul.
Here.
Also seated at the board table are Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Earl Metzler, and Business Administrator Jeff Dowd.
Okay. The first thing we need to discuss is a little bit about the upcoming public hearing next a week from today. The purpose of this is to offer increased opportunity for public discussion and questions on the money articles that are presented in this year's school warrant, specifically related to the default budget plus the other money items that are currently on the warrant. We will offer this time because it was felt that the last meeting, people didn't have an opportunity to discuss the items clearly. So we want to give them a full opportunity to vet these money items.
Your committee. This committee.
I'm sorry, this committee,
This
yes.
committee.
This committee, yeah. This will be a budget hearing, budget meeting, committee hearing. So I guess the first thing we need to understand is how the discussion for the default budget. You know, there were a lot of questions that we couldn't answer last time, and so we want to have the opportunity to do that. Now, I've been told that the school board will sit in on this meeting next week, so there'll be an opportunity for discussion with them. I need to be clear here that the budget committee, the default budget was not created by the budget committee. It was created by the school board, and it is their budget. We cannot discuss things that are related to intent or objectives or what have you for them. We cannot speak for that board. So if there's people, hopefully if they're there next week, they will be able to address your concerns. We will, other money warrant articles, we will address because we will have discussed them ourselves. So, what I'd like to do is, there's always been some confusion or misunderstanding about what exactly the public's role is in the default process. So I'd like to ask the attorney to come out and sort of explain this a little bit so we are all working on the same page for next week. So hopefully he'll be here next week.
The hot seat?
Oh. For the record, sir, would you identify yourself?
Yes, my name is James O'Shaughnessy. I'm an attorney from the Drummond Woodson Law Firm, and I practice school law and represent the Timberlane School District in SAU 55 and Hampstead.
What we're interested in hearing is just some guidance related to the public discussion of the default budget.
Okay? As I was driving up here, I was trying to come up with something funny to say right now. I feel like I'm in a congressional hearing. What I can say is my goal is to give advice that no one's happy with, rather than give advice that everyone's happy with. So, New Hampshire has this wonderful reputation of having the largest legislature, and I think one of the largest in the world and the largest in the United States. And as a result, when they craft law, they often do it imprecisely, and then they don't thereafter amend it to make it more precise. So guys like me, when we're interpreting law, are stuck with imprecise language, and then we have to be practical and common sense and use judgment to advise our boards. The statute we're talking about here is RSA 32.5, and that statute is titled Budget Preparation, and it's been on the books for quite a long time, but it stands for the proposition and basically says that the budget committee, if there's a budget committee, is required to hold at least one public hearing on each budget. And it goes on to say that all purposes and amounts of appropriations to be included in the budget or special warrant articles shall be disclosed or discussed at the final public hearing. That's all I got to go with respect to the default budget. All right, so that's what the law says you have to do. Let's back up and talk about the legal parameters. You guys are responsible as a budget committee under RSA 4013, which is commonly referred to as SB2, for developing the operating budget, right? That's your job. The operating budget is typically the first or second warrant article. The warrant article that asks for the appropriations to the operating budget contains a default budget. The default budget is a statutory formula. If you were sitting here earlier, you heard a little bit about what that statutory formula might include or exclude. But the default budget's a statutory formula that it's the responsibility of the governing body here, the school district, to develop the default budget. You guys do the operating budget, school board does the default budget. The rest of the articles in the warrant are the responsibility of the school board. You're responsible, however, for holding the public hearing. Mush that all together, and what do you have? Either a public hearing conducted by the budget committee during which you talk about only the operating budget but none of the other warrant articles, or some kind of combination of both where the budget committee at least discloses all of the other warrant articles and provides an opportunity to the public to ask questions about all of the things that have been disclosed. I think it's fair to say that the legislature, when they writes these laws, assumes a level of collaboration even when the budget committee and the school board are at odds, and a level of cooperation and even participation at the public hearing so that questions about the operating budget, the default budget, and any other warrant articles that ask for an appropriation can be addressed when the public has questions about those things. Does the law say you have to, at your public hearing, allow questions about this, that, or the other thing? No, it doesn't. I read you the law. It says shall be disclosed or discussed. Technically, a disclosure does not involve a discussion. So my guidance is transparency, right, in government. If you're going to have a public forum, allow the citizens to come up and make a presentation. Let them ask questions that are germane to the matter before them. If you don't want to answer the questions, don't answer the questions. If you can't answer the questions and you want to answer the questions, answer the questions. That's all up to you guys on how you and the board want to run your school district and how you want to act as elected officials. That's what I call up to you as the elected politicians. If the folks behind me, assuming these are all citizens, I'm not going to turn around and look. If they're dissatisfied with the level of collaboration, cooperation, and the inability of the bodies to get together and have a conversation about the things that they have to vote on at the deliberative session, then I suspect they'll do something about it in the public, they'll do something about it at the ballot. And that's their right, and that's how the process works in our democracy. I will also say that it's very common at a deliberative session for a moderator, when someone gets up and tries to ask detailed questions about line items in the operating budget, or detailed questions about any other thing in the whole warrant, the moderator to say, look, this isn't the time for that level of detail. We had board meetings all fall, we had a public hearing in January. Those were the opportunities for you to ask for that level of detail. The deliberative session is a time for us to go over things and have people vote, not to go line by line through the budgets and the warrant articles with that level of detail. So with that in mind, as what's going to happen in less than a month, a couple weeks, frankly, you ought to be giving some level of detail now to the extent your citizens have some questions if you're going to be doing your jobs as elected officials. Is that helpful? Is that
Yes.
provide guidance?
Does anyone have any questions?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I do have a question, Attorney O'Shaughnessy. I believe we're going to be discussing it shortly, but I believe the school board had made a recommendation, and I'm not 100% sure on the dollar amounts, to the budget committee to either include or transfer or increase the budget, the operating budget, by a certain amount to cover certain repairs to boilers, 150 or 200,000, whatever the amount is. If that were to happen now, being that we've already had our public hearing, we've already scheduled a supplemental hearing, would the budget committee be
able to do it legally?
in violation of any laws?
No, I mean, that's so that's the purpose of the supplemental public hearing is that you'll have one public hearing, you'll hear from the public, they'll tell you what they want and what they expect and what they hope for, and you'll come back and you may decide to add more money or move money around, and if you do add more money or change how you're going to be raising that money, you have to hold another meeting. You have to provide notice when you hold the other meeting, but your notice isn't, this is exactly what we're changing in between meetings. The notice is, we're having a supplemental meeting, and if you want to come and hear about what's going to be discussed and on the warrant at the deliberative session, you need to come to that hearing, because that's going to be the last budget hearing we hold. So I think you would be in compliance if you added additional appropriations or additional warrant articles between now and your already scheduled public hearing.
So, Mr. Chairman, would the idea be that we've presented the operating budget, we're comfortable that that operating budget has been presented in full?
Yes.
We presented the default budget. We did have some opportunity for public comment. No one made comment. We did indicate that I would not be able to answer any questions. No one on the board anticipated they'd be able to answer any questions. So if there were any question about that default, to have that represented. And I believe now the school board has finalized their warrant item or items, I believe just item, and we have an additional petition on an additional citizens petition. So it would be fair to hear them in that, or to present them in that order, and then open for comment, and if it's not something that we can address, don't address it.
I just had a question. So you said that the supplemental meeting is there if we add money. If we subtracted monies, do we have to have a supplemental meeting?
No.
I just want to clarify.
This actually came up last year at the public hearing, I believe. It says if the first, let me find it in the statute, sorry. It says the governing body shall not insert in any budget column or special warrant article an additional amount or purpose of appropriation which was not disclosed or discussed at that hearing without first holding one or more public hearings. So it's an additional appropriation amount or a change in purpose, really.
So a change in purpose would include cuts such that you couldn't actually do the things that you were intending to do. I mean, in theory, one can imagine that. I'm not saying that that would be done, I'm just saying in theory, if that's happened, you took $1 million out of it or something, and suddenly it's a different budget.
The statute does define purpose. It doesn't mean whether you'll be able to meet your goals or purposes as a result of the amount of money in there. It's whether what appropriation amount you're using, what you're using that appropriation for, what purpose you're allocating that money for. So if you're going to change what you're going to use that $1 million for to a different purpose, then you need to hold a supplemental hearing, because the public thinks you're spending that $1 million on thing one and you're changing it to thing two. Whether there's enough money to pay for all the things, in that line, that's not, that's a different issue.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions concerning? Thank you very much.
Am I excused?
Don't go far.
May need you.
We may need you, yeah.
All right, I'll hang out. I'll listen.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
so since we've already talked about this, Article 2, which is the operating budget, that our previous public hearing
yes.
discussed both items of this article, the operating budget and the default budget. So Article 2 has been discussed entirely, so that this supplemental meeting will only be addressing new articles that have been added, which would be Article 3, this capital reserve fund, which we're going to be discussing, and the Article 5, which is the citizens petition relative to the AstroTurf. That's my belief of what that supplemental meeting will be entail.
I-
If I may, what I thought I heard, and I could be wrong, was it was at least one hearing, so that if people wanted, like if people came and asked a question, why wouldn't we answer it if it had to do with that?
We did.
And I'm just saying, since we're having an additional meeting, it would be another that's what I thought I heard, so it's actually what I wrote down specifically.
So the other part I heard from Attorney O'Shaughnessy was, while you have to bring it up for just to disclose it, which we did, if you don't keep an open level of communication, you run the risk of the voters reacting in the community and or the way they vote. So we did bring it up lightly, or I'll say briefly, with no discussion. This is my part for transparency. If the school board's going to be there, I wouldn't suggest that we dive into line by line to micromanage it. But if we could have the school board there to represent a brief overview of anything that comes up for a question, without going into a microscopic view of it. And that way, we're giving some transparency. We're not saying, look, we're not answering any questions. And we hopefully we can satisfy some of the answers from the community, or the school board can.
Yeah, if I could, and I want you to resist the urge to direct the school board to do something or the school board to direct you. So I wanted to confirm with the chair before I offered it. It was my understanding that there was going to be some sort of presentation on the default, and so to your point, and then it's not going to be an hour presentation, and there'll be some presentation and some discussion.
That's excellent. That's
Okay, and that-
exactly what we need.
Confirmed by the chair.
That's exactly what we need, and to give the people a chance to talk about it. to ask
I
questions.
would hope that this is going to be an ongoing exercise in the future, because it just is at this point last year, when, at the public hearing, when a gentleman asked something about the default budget, when the entire school board was present, there was crickets up there. And that is the part that is hypocrisy. The gentleman that was over here today was part of that school board, and now is demanding the same thing that he didn't want to answer previously. That part is disgusting.
So I think it's important that what we do is, what we're doing here is this group of people representing today going forward, not discounting, history is important to be instructive, but let's focus on what we think is important for guidance for ourselves going forward. I think it's much more important than looking back.
David, if I could?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's important, and I get the history piece of this, but there are traditions in Timberlane, and I think, you know, our public hearing and working together on this and being able to your point, it should be the same every year, and that was the thing, we were getting different directives from different boards, and I think this has really cleared up for folks what you can expect from Timberlane in the future at our public hearings and deliberative sessions in that regard. So to your point, you're right, it should be if this is the way we're gonna do it, this is the way we'll do it, and Kathy will help the chairs with, because when you get new chairs that weren't part of, they can watch the old video, but they don't necessarily know exactly what went on to get to that point, right? So you would expect that we discuss all the money items at the public hearings next year. Now, if I was listening to Attorney O'Shaughnessy earlier, if the school board if the budget committee only did the operating budget at their public hearing, it sounded to me that then the school board would have to have their own public hearing on the warrant articles. And so it's like doubling the work, and you're asking people to come out twice when we really should do that together. So to your point, I like this, make that commitment moving forward.
100% agree.
Okay, good, thank you. Next, I'd like to turn over to Mr. Guide, if he could just update us on any changes in these,
Sure.
any items.
So we removed one. We didn't, actually, let me not even say that. We didn't remove one. It didn't make it, the cut, and it was to draw on the capital reserve. So what we've decided to do is to recommend to the budget committee to put in $200,000 into capital for boiler replacement and repair at all the schools. We don't know which school. Pollard had one that failed, it's running on one, it doesn't have redundancy right now. Atkinson has one, does not have redundancy right now. The middle school has 3 that I guess are the oldest in the school. So they need to be repaired. It kind of jumped up on us. We were thinking about doing a full pull on capital reserve for it until we hit the total number. The total number was $725,000, and we weren't going to do that. So they decided to go forward with asking the budget committee to put $200,000 into the capital of the proposed budget. And I make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay. Okay,
So,
it's moved and seconded,
you put it to the operating budget.
Yes. The capital portion.
So this would increase the 71.759 million by $200,000.
It'd be almost 71,959,415. Correct?
yes.
That's what I believe it would be.
Then a question, was there discussion about the remainder? Is that going to be captured, like the,
Mr. Geary is in the process of putting together a large facilities handbook where he's got end of life and when recommendation replacements and stuff like that encompasses CIP and hopefully I would assume the strategic plan and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it kind of, I believe the chair asked for a whole thing and that's what we got. None of us were expecting that number, the chair included, so
yeah, sure.
that's why it's not on the warrant anymore.
Yes.
So why did they take it off the warrant?
You want me to speak to that?
Sure.
Well, we were concerned with no means no. So in the event that we were to put something on a warrant and it was voted against, and it wasn't necessarily an emergency, if we were trying to get a redundant boiler replaced, if the community said no on that warrant, then you wouldn't be able to do it. So the logic was to actually budget for these things. Does that make sense?
No, back up. So if they said no to the
To the warrant.
boiler,
To the boiler.
go ahead, and something failed,
Well, I want you to think now, we're talking more than one boiler.
of course.
So some of this was the second boiler.
Right.
And if they said no, then we wouldn't be able to do it. And then there was some discussion about, does no mean no? Does that mean we wouldn't be able to do it at all?
Versus shifting money around.
Versus budgeting for it. Remember the community would say, if that's a need in this district, you should budget for it. Now, We need lights, too. That's Ronnie. Time to pack it up.
Put that in the
Come on, will you?
Is it a sign?
Business administrator, really cutting back, huh?
Hour, like certain hours.
So, so I just want people to understand that, Mr. Geary came on July 1, and he's doing a great job with an existing buildings report and conditions and those sorts of things. And I also don't want to take away from Mr. Hughes's work. He's an HVAC specialist, this is what he does. He's kept a lot of these things running. Now, they say end of life, and we're guessing at, 20 to 25, is it 15 to 20? Some of these boilers are right in that window. And then I hear things about, and I don't know a lot about this, it's not my expertise, but the chairman, this is his expertise, is one of the things that he knows a lot about. So he got involved in this and asked Mr. Geary to do this study. And it's the quality of the water that's running through the boilers and things, I guess, obviously takes a toll on them, and sometimes they fail probably more quickly than one would in your home, obviously, because of the volume. So we had some concerns. Obviously, we had the bitter cold, and then we had some failure, and we had some rooms that weren't quite what people had been accustomed to, which it just really put sharpened the lens. But this was not something that our maintenance department, whether it was under Mr. Geary's direction or previous directors, wasn't taking seriously. Obviously, they weren't in the CIP, so you'd say, well, they're not 5 years out, but there wasn't a real plan to replace. There was a plan to repair and just kind of keep them running. And because we have a lot of other things that are important too, but this was a direction that was asked the chair to look into. And sometimes you get sticker shock. He's like, well, this is what it would cost to do it. Whoa, $750,000 is a lot of money. So I think it was a healthy discussion. I think some of it was a little taken out of context, but I really don't want you to get the idea that we're not taking care of the things that you're providing us. Our boilers, the boiler at Atkinson was repaired. It's up and running, and the building is warm. It had a small hole in one of the sections, or I don't know the technical damage that was done, but it was a minor repair. General maintenance. What? Major repair. So it's a major repair. Well, it was expensive. So that's how that came. So I guess our concern was that no means no, and that's really why we were concerned about it being on a warrant versus budgeting for it.
Any other questions on this amendment?
Would that also raise the default budget too by the 200,000?
No, that would be a one-time expense. That would be in the following default budget, probably 1920,
Okay.
because it would be a one-time expense and it would be removed.
Okay.
Wait.
Any other, yes,
My questions are with something like this, I mean, we know that the price tag is roughly $750,000, and we're sort of taking a subsection of that and saying, okay, 200,000 should solve the problem.
Put a hole in the dike.
Not solved.
For basically a series of fixes. I mean, it's not just one boiler, it's multiple ones, from what I can gather.
Correct. Did you hear that whole discussion?
No, we're in there.
It was,
We're utilizing Mr. O'Shaughnessy's legal time here to its maximum extent.
We had it on, but the
so
volume was horrible.
he had,
Couldn't hear it.
I'm sorry, he had two tiers, so it was the middle school and Pollard were probably were tier 1, and then the other boilers at Danville, Atkinson, and the two Sandown schools were tier 2. So he broke it into two separate, and they were both about in the 300 range. 327 and 3, I had it written down.
It's just that with something like this being such a large dollar amount and being at the very end of this process, I mean, it just seems like we're rushing the ball here to get something on here, to turn around and fix something without really studying it. I mean, I really find it, being on the CIP to find out we haven't even talked, this wasn't even in there, and I was making, thinking of comments, we have an elevator for Pollard in the CIP, but yet we don't have boilers in all of our systems, which should have an amortization life schedule and so forth. So that's where I think, CIP's definitely got to start to get their, they've done some really great jobs, and I commend them for that, but this is an area that I think that needs to be addressed.
Well, I think that's what Mr. Geary, obviously, I think that's what you'd see these now as he made his request, but in fairness, I don't believe that it was part of the plan, and that's why it wasn't in the plan. Like, the plan was to repair them and keep them going and work on all those other projects that you saw in the CIP, because there was a lot. I mean, you sat on the board, you saw how many, and then here's another $750,000. And so what motivated, what started this? It really was the bitter cold and Chairman Boyle saying, hey, take a look at these. So that's why, so I don't think it was neglected and left out for any reason other than what I just said. Does that make sense? Why it's not in the CIP, I guess.
It was definitely an oversight, obviously. It should have been part of the
Well, there are a
strategic
lot of
plan.
processes that are coming together now with the strategic planning, with the CIP, and with the facilities work that's being done. So, I think eyes open, and I think it gets captured going forward.
I kind of agree with Mr. O'Neill. It's kind of hard, at this point in the game, we haven't really had a chance to look at other, what the option, what's the pricing, how do we come up with these numbers? I know you've mentioned Mr. Boyle recommended the company, correct, to price this.
Uptech, yep.
We have that, and then just,
I mean, I would think you'd have more than one bid, is
when
my
we,
concern.
exactly,
That's
when
all.
we estimate stuff on the fly, we have gross errors in our estimation. Look at the deliberative session a couple
Both
of years ago.
both directions, right?
Well, it was 168% for 250 grand got put in for Danville, the sprinkler systems and all that. We didn't even budge on that. So it's 250 grand that was raised through taxation that didn't go anywhere and went back through the surplus, but that's a couple years, I mean, that's a year down the road that we get that money back. The point was is that 250 grand was added and raised, and we found out the true cost of that was like 600 and something thousand dollars. So we were gross in our estimation process. So are we now over on the opposite side of this? We could be 750,000 and we're, it could be 400,000. It's a lot better to swallow than 750, or is it 1.2 million? Who knows? The confidence level of that number doesn't mean a lot, to be honest with you, at least from my viewpoint.
Is
I
there a
understand what you're
probability-
saying. I'd say I'm sorry, in the spirit of those were just the sprinklers, but there wasn't the water to get them to the sprinklers, right? But
It was the
Uptech,
complete plan, and the
Oh, I
problem
know.
was, it was done on the floor of the deliberative, and it was just to turn around, and the sales pitch at that point was for safety, all this other stuff. And I don't wanna go down and rehash that, but the point was, is that after the fact, we found out we were grossly estimating that. And it was
Correct.
168% in error.
correct. It's probably even more than that, because that 250 would have just, after the fact, we found that's just the piping and sprinklers. But I think this particular instance, I know it was done quickly. It was done with Uptech, which is a reputable company, and we believe those are pretty good budget numbers. I mean, we believe they're really solid, but I understand the need to study it more. We didn't have a lot of time. We were just asked to do this. He had a week or so, right?
So we have a motion on the floor that Mr. Guide made about adding 200,000 to the capital, to our budget. I'd like to just short this for a second. I believe Mr. Doobie would come up with another motion after this one.
I was planning to, yes.
Yeah, so I guess what I'd like to do is maybe call a question and then have you discuss your next one, because I believe that's going to be a better solution.
Okay, I can discuss it now if you don't mind, or do you want to call the question?
We gotta vote on it.
All right, let's call the question.
All right. I call a
I just
question.
did.
Are there any more comments on this proposed revision to the operating budget? Okay. I'm gonna call for a vote, by a roll call, please.
Mr. David,
No.
Mrs. Doobie,
Yes.
Mr. Doobie,
No.
Mr. Gerns,
No.
Mr. Guide,
Yes.
Mrs. Hammond,
No.
Mr. Hughes,
No.
Mr. Mascola,
No?
Mr. O'Neill,
No.
Mr. Paul,
No.
Okay. What's the count?
8-2.
2-8. Okay. The motion to revise the operating budget by $200,000 fails. Mr. Doobie, you have a,
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that the Budget Committee recommend to the school board that a new warrant article be added to the warrant, which would, and this isn't the language for the warrant article, but it would ask the legislative body to appoint the school board as agents of the Capital Reserve Fund.
I'll second that.
could you repeat that?
Yes. Shall the Budget Committee recommend to the school board that a new warrant article be introduced to the warrant, which asks the legislative body to appoint the school board as agents of the Capital Reserve Fund.
The legislative body to
Appoint
appoint,
the school board as agents of the Capital Reserve Fund.
Did you get a second?
I didn't.
Yeah, I second it.
Oh, thank you, okay. So, the purpose of this is we have approximately $1.2 million in capital reserve. Okay, so, in that area, the capital reserve fund can only be drawn on during the voting period. So that ties up a significant amount of money for a long time. So if we were to have an emergency in April, and we needed to draw on the capital reserve fund, we couldn't do it until the following March, after a vote. By appointing the school board as agents, and we have a boiler blow, should it pass, we have a boiler blow, the school board can hold a public hearing and draw on that capital reserve fund. I would like to think that if it was approved, the school board would put policies in place that would dictate how and when they can draw on that. But it really, it's protection from an emergency where we don't have money in the operating budget. So we're running a tight operating budget if this budget were to be approved in March.
1,373.
I'm sorry?
1,373.
1,373,000. So we're gonna be running a tight operating budget if this operating budget gets approved in March. If we have an emergency, we don't have $250,000. All 3 boilers go, all 4 boilers go, we need $750,000. There's money in the capital reserve fund that the school board as agents could draw from now, if it were to be approved.
I'm gonna put Attorney Jim O'Shaughnessy on the spot here, but during our brief conversation, he actually said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that many school districts, school boards are actually operating their capital reserve funds in this fashion. So, maybe we wanna have,
So the statute that authorizes school districts to have capital reserve funds and expendable trust funds is RSA 198 20 C. I opened right up to it. That was magic. And right in the first paragraph, I mean, I think honestly, the legislature it actually assumes that the board, when the legislative body creates this kind of a fund, that the legislative body will delegate the control and spending of that fund to the elected governing bodies. And that's consistent in towns for select boards, and that's also almost universal in school districts. I was surprised when I was talking with the superintendent and Kathy Belcher to kind of go through the history. I was surprised that the board wasn't agents to expend this fund. It's really meant to operate like a savings account, and it's held by the trustees of trust funds, and the requirement under the statute is that before the board can expend, it has to hold at least one public hearing, and notice of the time, place, and subject of the hearing has to be published in the newspaper at least 7 days in advance. So the form of the question would be, shall the Timberline Regional School District name the school board as agents to expend the blank fund, period? You would have, I think, I don't know if it would be universal, but I think you would likely have the support of the budget committee, you'd have the support of the board, I assume. Simple majority, and if it fails, then nothing changes. You're not the agents. If it passes, then you are the agents, and you would proceed to adopt a policy consistent with the statute. That's it.
And just one more point. My concern prior to making the motion, we had discussions with Attorney O'Shaughnessy, is the check and balances. What keeps the school board in check from using those funds as we would intend for emergencies on capital? And the thought was maybe recommending that the school board, the budget committee also be agents, but that isn't legally viable because we're not a legal agent. The school board is. However, if a warrant article were to be placed on the warrant and it were to pass, it could be revoked through the next election cycle, the next voting
Yeah.
period. Right. So
Either, by petition warrant article or by the board, seeking to revoke its own authority. I would hope, and I think the boards are pretty responsible. And I have boards that are very hesitant to tap into a capital reserve fund unless they really need it, unless it's part of, either an emergency or part of a strategic plan or a CIP. I mean, because they're elected and, you know, they're not gonna just spend the money without being responsible. It's not a guarantee, but that's typically how it works. But yeah.
I have a question I'll ask you, maybe you can turn around and inform it to the chairperson of the school board. But would they be willing to work with this type of change? Meaning, do they think it would be a good fit? So I guess my point would be is, maybe bring the chairperson of the school board up for just a second, and just get their stance on it.
Mr. Boyle, would you like to comment?
Long time no see.
Hey, Brian.
I think the idea has some merit, but something of this magnitude clearly should go in front of the whole board. So it's not really my call to make. My concerns have been mentioned that I would like to see if we go down that road, it should clearly be emergency in nature. You people all sat in front of this room here, and there's a lot of worthwhile projects that are not funded, and you'd hate to see, just because it's over $1 million, that someone was able to get 5 votes on any given Thursday night to withdraw something from capital reserve versus the Pollard School boiler should be replaced. That's my personal thing. I mean, I like the concept, but I want to use it as, me personally, as a only as needed emergency type basis.
I think if it were to be placed on the ballot and it were approved, then I would like to think the school board would then develop a policy around that. Okay, we have this authority. How do we manage that?
All right.
Yeah, I'd ask the committee to consider this. What happens if that goes to warrant and it fails, and then a boiler fails? What I would do is I would put that particular thing on the warrant moving forward and create that policy. But you'll have, if that original warrant fails and one of those boilers goes down, then they can't expend the funds, absolutely positively, because no means no. So that would be my concern in that 1-year period. I think moving forward, that's a great idea. But for next year, knowing you may have a situation, I think you have to at least appropriate something for, in case one of those boilers go down. Just a thought.
A couple of questions for Attorney Shaughnessy. If that were to be proposed, if the school board were inclined to put that on the warrant, correct me if I'm wrong, but especially if they developed a policy which suggested that they would not spend unvoted funds, save for emergencies, such a vote would not take away the right of the voting, the citizens' right, to vote on something to be drawn from capital reserve, a longer-term project, a paving project or something like that. Would they still have the ability to vote on it, or would that be advisory to the school board?
Oh, I understand what you're saying. It would, and I think this is, I had a conversation with the director of DRA about this last week. It would sort of be a redundancy, where you've delegated the authority to the board, then the board goes and asks permission from the legislative body that just gave them authority. It's like, you know, it's like your mom giving you $10 and then say, here, you can spend this, and then saying, hey, Mom, can I spend it? I mean, you could do it, but it would really be, we're looking for your blessing from the legislative body. And so you could ask for it knowing that you have the authority to spend it if the blessing isn't provided. But yeah, that's, I don't.
Okay, and
That's my
we,
answer.
we also have, and I know we're here for this part of the meeting, and I don't want to put anyone on the spot. Mrs. Green, while she was here, indicated that if we needed to withdraw from the capital reserve fund, that application could be made to, I don't know, the state, DRA, DOE, someone, to draw on that in the case of emergency. And I'm not sure that there's statutory authority for that.
No, there is, so I think, and this is what I don't know everything.
We do have a separate fund
So do you have a
retention.
contingency fund?
No.
You guys have not adopted a contingency fund under 19820?
I believe that's also known as the retention fund.
Oh, the retention,
Yeah, well, do you retain fund balance at the end of the year? Like,
by vote every year, and
so every year you ask for authority, you don't do it automatically?
every year we're required, I believe, to vote. If we don't vote, it lapses.
Okay.
So we do vote, and we have a balance of 175,000. That balance is typically used with permission of DRA for whatever emergency situation comes up, in that regard. So I think when we talk about capital reserve and that 1.3+ million balance versus the fund retention, there is the ability to draw on these, but in a very limited capacity. So the school board, if they don't have the ability to draw from that capital reserve, we run into situations that we may have a very large expenditure and may not be able to draw from it, because I don't think.
So let me answer that question. It's a trust fund created by the legislative body. They exercise control over it unless they delegate the board as agents to exercise their control as the board's legal agents. The State Board of Education, the Department of Education doesn't have any
Jurisdiction.
any involvement, any power or anything. It's not in the statute at all. What we may be talking about is this contingency fund, whatever you guys call it, under 198.4B. You can retain fund balance a certain percent every year, up to 2.5. There's also a provision in the statute that allows you to have the legislative body vote one time to allow you every year to retain up to 2.5% as an emergency fund balance. And if you have that contingency fund and you need to make an emergency expenditure from that, you do have to get permission from the Department of Education, and there's a process in the law for that. That's probably what we're talking about, but not for a capital reserve. That's a different animal.
Yes.
Would the legislative body in this warrant article to assign the delegation of authority to, in this case, to the governing body, would they be able to add an addendum to that besides simple majority? Could they turn around and say by a vote of greater than 7-2?
Could the
To address something that Chairman
deliberative
Boyle
session
has brought on
create-
up with it, just a 5-4 decision, sort of like we have in Congress, a 60% vote in Senate and so forth. I mean, it makes it a higher litmus test for it to actually.
We already have the supermajority vote on some things, so I would assume that we could craft a policy that
Not a
just says.
policy, because a policy could always be overridden by the school board, and that's just a simple majority. What I'm looking at is this crafting it in the warrant article, which then would be bound legally, that's saying is that you have the right, as this governing body, to spend from this fund with a public hearing when you obtain a vote of greater than 7 votes in the affirmative. Versus right now, if you just had it as a vote of the school board, it would be a simple majority. A 5-4 vote would make it pass. And that's what I'm looking at,
They
is
don't
that
put
from an attorney's
numbers.
point of view.
So
We don't put
can't-
numbers on it, it's percentage.
So in other words, that shall the district name the board agents to expend, subject to a vote of 2/3 of the governing body?
Right.
Well, I mean, there's no case law on that, and there's nothing in the statute that says either way. But my interpretation, how it works typically in New Hampshire, is the legislature gives the sort of parameters, and those are the parameters. And if you start tinkering with that too much, I'm not sure it would be binding. I'd like to say, yeah, there's ways you guys can reach out beyond just the giving of authority and try to control what happens once you've given the authority, which I think I understand that interest. I don't think the statute allows it. I think you give it or you don't.
Right.
That's it.
At this point, I think we've heard quite a bit, so this is really a school board issue. Mr. Dooley was just saying, we'd like to make a recommendation for the school board, so.
Need to move the question.
So we'll either move the question and then just let the school board figure it out on their own down the road, or?
I think so.
That's right. Yeah. All right, I propose we move the question. Are there any more points to discuss?
It's,
Yes.
I'm generally in very favor of this, and I know in my town, I presented a lot of these to be in these kind of trust funds, because it gives the town, the selectmen in this case, the flexibility to, replace a cruiser when it's needed, instead of turning around and fixing an end-of-life cruiser when something, after the town meeting should happen. And I've talked to Dr. Metzler about these kind of funds as well, because it does give the school board a tremendous amount of flexibility, and with that is the power of that. And one of it is you need to take that power seriously. And one of the things as you build up is over time is trust, and it's a thing of that whole caveat. It can be revoked, the following year by 25 people on a citizen's petition. So at that point, it's, if that's this power, it does move forward and is granted with it, I would just recommend that the school board treat it very gingerly, because it can be revoked.
All right, I'd like to call for a vote by poll, please.
What are we voting on? To recommend the school board?
On,
This is just a recommendation.
just
Just a recommendation.
Recommendation.
We can't put it up
Clerk,
there.
read the motion, please.
Motion for the budget committee to recommend to the school board that a new warrant article be added, which asks the legislative body to appoint the school board as agents of the capital reserve fund.
Right. Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. David?
Yes.
Mrs. Doobie?
Yes.
Mr. Doobie?
Yes.
Mr. Gerns?
Yes.
Mr. Guide?
Yes.
Mrs. Hammond?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Mascola?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Paul?
Yes.
Okay. Motion carried. Thank you very much. The next thing is the citizens petition for Article 5, I believe.
Are you doing Article 3 too?
Yes. Did we do that?
We have to do Article 3.
It's warmed up for you.
Oh, capital reserve fund.
All right. Is there any discussion on the capital reserve fund?
I don't know what you.
Any-
Are we voting recommendations on the
No,
warrant?
no, we're
articles?
doing that next week.
Okay.
We're not doing recommendations. If there's any questions or comments. Did you guys already take that out?
No, we took out a different.
Okay.
Misunderstood.
So the one thing that's remaining is the new warrant, warrant article. Mr. Scipia,
I got you.
very quickly, please.
I understand. I appreciate I'm supposed to be on at 7:45, so I will do my best to get you guys out of here as quick as
In St. Louis, it's probably close.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to introduce,
Sorry.
do I have to tell Heather on you?
No, please don't.
Okay. I'd like to introduce Mr. Alan Dijak. He drove up from Connecticut this evening. He works for Field Turf, and I am not, contrary to popular belief, an expert on turf fields, but he is. So there will be probably a question or two at the end. And anyways, thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much. As you can see, our football field is our biggest classroom.
Good pitch, right off the bat.
Yep. Switch the, we had a few technical difficulties, so next slide, please. Guys, switch computers. Is Dean there? Oh, oh, there we go, Dean. Okay. Okay, so a little bit about Jack Sapia, for those that don't know me. I've served, I think, the community well.
Can we speed this up and not take the personal
Mike,
stuff?
please. I served as a Little League coach, president of Little League, Timberlane Tornadoes coach. I sat on the Board of Selectmen, Planning Board for the town of Atkinson, Selectmen's rep to the Budget Committee, school board member. I put in over 1,000 hours rebuilding fields out back here on campus, somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000 of personal donations. I hope my wife's not watching, to those fields. I sat on the Athletic Advisory Committee. I started the Wellness Center Initiative. I sat on the CIP Committee. I chaired the Facilities Committee, sat on the facilities for 2 years. My daughter played, and these last two I think are important. My daughter played on the Timberwolves for approximately 14 years, and my son is still playing college ball and plays for the NYCBL, that's the New York City College Baseball League, in the summers. What those last two basically mean is I have seen a lot of assets in the Northeast, and now I'm starting to see some down south. So I've seen the good and I've seen the bad, and I think I can bring some best practices to Timberlane. Over here, real quick, I did, because we had to change computers, I just thought you guys, it would help to get a little lay of the land. Up in the far right-hand corner, you see that lime green dot. That is the retention pond that I'll be speaking about briefly. And then going directly over to the left-hand side of the screen where you see the varsity baseball field, what you'll see is between the varsity baseball field and the girls' JV field is the JV soccer and boys soccer field. And I'll just use that as an example. I could use basically the whole campus as an example, but as you can see, our fields overlap each other. And the real problem with that is when the fall ends, the fields are frozen, there's no time to recover the fields. And when spring comes and the fields are saturated, the maintenance crews can't get out there and fix them. So what I would propose here is the warrant. Shall the district, and I would ask just for an open mind here, and I think at the end of this you'll find it quite pleasing. Shall the district raise and appropriate the sum of $800,000 for the purpose of increasing athletic player safety and decreasing district operating costs by professionally installing an artificial turf to an existing playing field with the projected savings that will pay it back on investment in 5 years. This will be a multi-purpose field supporting a host of district sports. It shall be made available for a fee to outside parties when not in use by the district for the purpose of generating additional revenue to further offset costs and shorten time to maximize return on investment. Repayment shall be spread out over the term of 8 years at a maximum rate of 4.75% and shall be installed during the first budget year. So in other words, what I did was I spread the payments out over 8 years, and I'm sure by the time we get to deliberative session, we would have a firm interest number on that, so everyone would know what we're talking about. So here's where is the proposed, it's the football field. The field would be 80,000 square feet. It'd go edge to edge along the track, up and down the sides, and then go about 10 feet over on the back of each end zone. The resource that I've used to help, and it's been Andrew from Field Turf, and I ask you to go on their website and look at everything that they have, and I think you'll learn a lot about the things I've learned about over the last 3 or 4 months. One of the reasons why we picked the football field is because it currently has lights. And what the lights do is it extends the playing time each day, and it allows you additional sources of revenue. It will be a multi-purpose field. It will be lined as a multi-purpose field. And I have been asked the question about the strategic plan and where we'd be moving forward. There are a lot of things, as you saw on the prior slide, that need to be reconfigured out here to make us run efficiently. But the football field is kind of and the track in the stadium is kind of a standalone entity. So, under any strategic plan, you would not see any changes to that configuration. Why? Why am I doing this? I don't know, my 2 kids are out of school. So here are the advantages. Student safety, short and long-term reductions to the operating budget, the ecological impact, consistent and improved field conditions, economics, revenue opportunities, enhanced performance and extended usage, a positive financial impact to the district town assets, and we'll get into that a little bit. So from a safety perspective, and the source that we used was incident cause and severity of high school football player injuries on field turf versus that of natural grass. And what the study showed, and there's a lot, let me just preface this by saying you can go online and there's a whole host of stuff, good, bad, about turf versus grass. What I would ask you to do is don't look at articles, but look at the studies. And I have some resources in the back, and I think you'll find those quite credible. There are a lot of articles that ask questions, but really give you no data. So what they found was that there's 43% less concussions and 44% less ACL injuries. And the other thing to take into consideration is that AstroTurf has evolved over the years. When I played football in college, it was asphalt with an indoor carpet rolled over the top of it. When you hit your head, you were really hitting your head on the asphalt. Now it's and you'll, Mr. Dijak can speak to it, but, whoops. So anyways,
I'm sorry, we're really running long. The school board still has to get back to work.
I understand that, but I will go as
And
fast
you
as I can.
understand you'll also have an opportunity at the hearing,
Public hearing.
at the
Yeah,
public hearing next week.
So Mr. Dijak has waited here for over 2 hours. I think you
Well,
give me
give
5
We'll give him
minutes.
some time, but I'm just saying
No,
we're really running along.
I'm trying to be fair. So, anyways, what you'll see is in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see what's important to know here when looking at this is the increase or decrease, should I say, in injuries when you use a deeper, more plush field, okay, a generation, what they call, I believe it's generation 4 field, a level 4 field. Next slide. Next slide, Dean, please.
You have to do it.
You have the
Oh,
have it.
that's right, sorry. Okay, so from an ecological impact perspective, I would ask you all to go back and look at and reference the school board meeting on 4/6 at 1:39. Jeffrey does a phenomenal job of framing up some of we have a lot of environmental challenges behind the school, we really do, which I won't bring up right now. But one of the major things is we're short on water. We currently run 71,000 gallons of water a day, but we're short 71,000 gallons of water. The current irrigation system is overburdened and breaks down on a regular basis. This costs the district money. The inability for the irrigation system has come with additional costs. We just had to replace the baseball field at a cost of around $10,000 2 years ago. There's additional cost every week. We spend about a full man day cleaning out irrigation heads.
I think so, yeah. I think so.
And one of the things is dependability. We draw everything out of that pond. And sometimes Mother Nature's good to us and sometimes not. We need to find ways of mitigating our water usage, and we need to be good stewards of our property. We also have a proposed irrigation pond for $148,500. That doesn't include permitting and engineering. What would be the impact of turf? It reduces our water usage by 1 to 3 million gallons of water a year. That's a New Hampshire state average. So we would have no immediate need for the irrigation pond. There would be less stress on the system. The sprinkler heads will not go off during the marching band's performance at halftime. That field is the #1 draw on our system, so we would be eliminating that. And it would allow other fields to rest. Very briefly, let me talk about resting fields. Due to our lack of fields and the overuse of the limited fields that we do have, the fields are overburdened. By reallocating our resources and our teams and the usage, what you'll end up doing is you'll end up reducing the impact on the natural fields. This means less maintenance on natural grass fields, which decrease cost, which provides better playing surfaces and less injuries. One of the other advantages of going with turf is that early season in the spring. Right now, our baseball team practices in the gym with rolled-up socks that are duct taped into balls. Lacrosse, they travel at a cost to the boosters. So what you could do in the spring is right after lacrosse gets done practicing, baseball can go out and practice because the field conditions aren't such that baseball or softball can practice on their fields well into the season.
I'd be interested to hear from your guest.
Pardon me?
I'd be interested to hear your guest. If we could move on to him, please. What he has to.
Could I have like 5 more slides. I would really like to give this presentation. It's an $800,000, especially with the math part of it, because I haven't been able to show how this pays for itself. And I think that's what the Budget Committee would really want to hear.
Mr. Chairman, at the public hearing, Mr. Sapia can say all this. The guest that he brought, the professional who traveled 2 hours, may not be at the public hearing. So I would suggest he speaks now because we are on a reduced time. We have a half hour for this meeting.
But we're on reduced time, Mr. Muscola, through no fault of mine or Mr. Dychek's, and he's here to answer questions.
Then
He's
let
not
him
here to give
speak.
part of the presentation.
Let him speak.
Jack, if we could, so the money part of it's the big part for
Yeah.
the budget committee? Can we go to that slide?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
This meeting wasn't scheduled,
Fair enough.
right? So we wouldn't be hearing about it tonight.
Exactly. And that's all, I want to give the opportunity
Okay.
to talk about the money.
Yeah.
So here we go. So I'm going to go right down to the bottom of the slide, if that's okay with everybody. If you take the $800,000 at 4%, It's spread out over 8 years. It's $104,000 minus anticipated that's annual. It would anticipated revenue per year of $30,000, and that was, I was told 100,000, 150,000. 30,000 is a very conservative number, but I'm very confident that that's fair. So the impact, yes.
To interrupt you, where? So who's paying that? Who's paying to use the field?
It would be sports. It would be sports teams. It would be, for instance, Haverhill is well over $10,000 a month. I mean, that was in the newspaper. I know of other turf fields in the region that's all pretty consistent, 10,000. If you look at field hockey, all the championships are done either at Bedford or Exeter. For some reason, field hockey's drawn to turf. I've been approached by a few, Jack, if you do this, we'd be very interested in this. And I kind of sidebar that, but I think that's over the course of 12 months, you have a ton of youth sports that would love to be out there and do that. You take the Timberwolves, for example. They're all over the place because they only have 2 fields and about 300 teams. They're always looking for space, and then what you end up having is the Timberwolves 18U team practicing on the center field of the baseball field, which creates all kinds of safety issues and wear issues. So anyways, getting back to the numbers. So the actual impact per year minus revenue would be $74,000. The $65,000 to maintain, which is cutting, striping, fertilizing, irrigating, slit seeding, resodding, that's a number that I ran by the administration. I used the cost of $30 per hour labor costs, which is basically the national average, which was actually very close to what we do. And that number is very consistent with a standard football field. You'll hear the numbers anywhere between $55,000 to $70,000. Now, one thing that I took the privilege of doing, and maybe you agree with this or you don't, I took the cost of the installing the irrigation pond and brought that out over an 8-year period over the term of the loan, which is another negative $18,744. Then I added $5,000 to maintain the new turf, and what you ended up with is a net gain or a positive show of $4,744. So what I would tell you is the first year, we wouldn't spend it in the budget, but for the next 7 years, you could reduce the budget by roughly $70,000 because those maintenance costs are already built into your budget, right? They would come out. We have someone cutting the grass. We pay someone to fertilize. Those are costs that would reduce the budget. And what happens after the 8 years, the life expectancy of this turf is 10 years. It pays for itself in the first 5. You now have enough money to put down a new carpet. It isn't $800,000 again, it's $300,000. Okay, so what basically ends up happening is it becomes perpetual care. For lack of a better term, it's perpetual care. So basically, you've installed the turf, you've become environmentally more conscientious, and you've solved some of the water problems. You've done it, you've reduced the cost to nothing, and now you have much safer field conditions. All right, so I'll skip over that. One of the things I'll say, again, when you go online, and I know a lot of mothers, we should care. I'm begging you to go out and do the research. But don't go to articles, don't go to a documentary that MSNBC did. Go to the United States Consumer Protection Safety Commission. Go to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the New York State Department of Health, the Washington State Department of Health. Go to studies, and the studies will bring you to, those are things that will bear out facts. So with that said, it's the EPA just did the most recent study that I saw that addresses some of the major health concerns is the EPA tire crumbling study of February 12, 2016. How'd I do?
Yeah, my name's Andrew. I don't have a formal presentation, but I can answer any questions that you have. I think you covered most of it, so I'm happy to answer anything you have.
Anybody have any questions?
I had some. How many ACL injuries did we have last year?
I don't know, but I can tell you on my street, on one given year, we had 3 knee surgeries, 3 ACL injuries, and that's one street, 1 year. If that, and this doesn't mean you're not gonna have any ACL injuries.
No, yeah,
It just means they're gonna be reduced. I mean, to think you're not gonna get a concussion, but and Andrew, I know, can address one of them for sure.
Angelo's here if you want to ask sports injuries questions. I'm putting him on the spot.
Angelo, how many ACL injuries do we have in the course of a year?
all right.
Yeah. And when you talk about concussions, really, it's the head-to-ground concussions I think you eliminate. Andrew could probably speak to that a little bit better.
So like about 90% of the concussions are head-to-head, or if not more. And so concussions aren't a huge issue when you hit the ground. But compared to, you know, any kind of normal municipal field, synthetic turf field is much safer. If you have a field that's professionally maintained, it's about equal. But a field that's professionally maintained in a high school level is almost impossible.
I do have one more, I'm sorry. So we're gonna raise and appropriate, no, maximum interest rate not to exceed 4.75. Who's financing?
So there are programs out there for municipal financing, even though it's an asset that, you know, companies can't resell. There are sports financing companies, PNC is one of them, and they have a municipal rate with 0% down. It's about 4 to 4.5% right now, and you can do it up to 8 years.
And if Al wants to speak to the crown in the field, feel free to do so.
Well, no, I mentioned that to you earlier. It is Crown.
Yeah, it's the existing field has its challenges, but when you look at our water issue back there and some of the environmental issues we have, and, you know, coaching youth football, if a player literally gets tackled on the far end of the field, he disappears, because the crown is like 3 feet high.
Wait a minute. His son made most of his yards running downhill.
That's right, it did help. It did help. No, the environmental
Every sweep
piece
was
is a big
downhill.
piece.
Yeah. And there were things-
Down the water is major.
There were things, I mean, look, I've been out there for 7 or 8 years, and when the pumps break down for 2 weeks, and then they come back out for a week, and break down 2 more weeks, they have to replace the baseball infield was just painful. So and to think you got a guy out there changing sprinkler heads every day, that will take a lot of that away. And, you know, again, from an environmental standpoint, from a fiscal standpoint, this makes a lot of sense, with the exception of the first year, where if the warrant fails, you don't want to take that money out. But from that point moving forward, I count on you guys taking 70 grand out of the budget to offset the cost if we were to get this done. So I ask for your support, and hopefully that was, I bet you there were a lot of bets that I'd go over the 10 minutes, I'm sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Chair.
It's very informative. If we have questions, we'll direct them to you, and if you wish, you can have your professional.
What I'm probably gonna do is put out some information on social media and directions. I'll put the presentation out there. I do have numbers and documentation on spreadsheets if anyone wants them. You know, how did we calculate, how did we come up with that 65,000? More than happy to give it to
We
you.
will see you next week then.
Oh, you betcha. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking time to drive up from Connecticut.
Thank you.
And,
Drive safe.
Thank you.
I'd like to announce that the public hearing next Thursday, the 25th, will be at the PAC at 7 p.m.
It is at the PAC?
At the PAC.
Yeah, can I just clarify why? It was posted initially for here, but, because there was some concerns about students, but the students are using the recital hall, they're not using the PAC, so we'll be okay in the PAC.
Okay, so we're gonna meet on the PAC for the public hearing next Thursday at 7 p.m.
If I can make a recommendation with that also, since we did originally advertise it as being at this facility right here, that a sign be placed out
Yeah,
front telling you where it's gonna go.
Front and back. We might even put people here just to tell people
That's
to.
fine, as long as you guys get covered in that regard, because
So we'll have someone,
Supposed to
we'll
post it a
have
week
someone at
ahead of
each
time.
door to direct people.
And with that, I will, yes,
So through emails, I asked about, to have the agenda added for the revenue for the full-time K ad. Aid from the state.
speak to that, too.
He's got a couple of revenue issues, some new information too.
Well, so, our business administrator had handed out to everybody, I believe you all have an email chain from there. There's some question about whether we actually are able to get that aid. And even this is ambiguous, it doesn't really say whether we can or can't. One thing I do want to point out in this email chain on page 2, there's an email that came from Caitlin Davis, and in the second sentence of that, it says, "Only districts and charter schools that make the full-day option available to all kindergarten students will qualify." We don't make it available to all because we charge a tuition. So I don't,
That's not the explanation we got.
well, that's what it says in the email that was sent.
No, I know, and
that was received. So,
my understanding, a technical advisory will be coming out to clear that up, because many districts are struggling with this.
yeah,
Making it available to all and paying the full, or paying part of it, it said at the district's expense, and they didn't clarify as to what part of the expense. That's why we had asked some questions. So I know there's a technical advisory coming out soon from the DOE, because a lot of districts have the same questions you have.
but until that's out and we have that, I can't go forward with having that on, listed on as our revenue.
No,
Because if it turns out that that isn't,
Yeah, it's not-
then it's revenue we've buffered into there that now will have to be taxed.
And I don't think, my experience with the DOE, I don't think we're gonna have the technical advisory in time for you to do, in time for your comfort level in this regard.
So in removing that from our revenue budget doesn't stop us from getting that revenue. It
No,
just-
we had to, there's new districts are trying to now offer it, so we had to, there was some adjustments made at the, we have a single sign-on system where we have to show what we actually do,
Yep.
and they're going in and evaluating districts to figure out who's going to be eligible or not, and you are absolutely correct, it doesn't impact, we're going to go after that revenue, irregardless of whether it's in this revenue budget or not, obviously, right?
Yep.
So I understand your concern.
There's just a lot of questions, so I would like to make a motion to change our revenue budget to strike that 123,000 from our revenue budget. Until, you know, unless somebody has anything that shows
Well-
that we will get that.
How's that gonna?
I'll second
It's gonna
that as
affect the
well.
budget number.
Well, it is, but could I on revenue, and Mr. Dow?
Yeah, let me go through the process.
Okay.
The motion's been made
One second.
to reduce the revenue budget by $123,000,
Yes.
and it's been seconded.
Correct.
So now there's discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to do this all in one one fell swoop, if you would. I mean, Attorney Dowd has some other revenue that we've come across since your last meeting. So I think maybe you could disclose that at this point, and you can get an idea of the, in one time? That work? Does that work for you?
Yes.
Okay.
yeah.
I would, I think Mr. Paul properly characterized revenue at this point as trying to nail 2x4 to the wall, no, nailing Jello to the wall.
Jello to the wall.
Jello, it was Jello. So, and it's probably an adequate and accurate description. On this kindergarten aid, I'll ask you to, I just handed out two sheets. One's a Legiscan, and on the second page under methodology, you'll skip down, I think, to the last sentence. Based on preliminary data, which does not include new full-time day programs which have started since September of 16. Traditional public schools will see an increase of $14,537,978 in adequate education grants under this bill. When I look at the $1,100 that would be going to those districts per full-time K and the numbers that they use to come up with that figure, they seem to correlate, which is the second page you have, kindergarten numbers from the state provided as of October 1st, 2016, so this is dated. You'll see kindergarten statewide 12,270 students. When we report kindergarten, we report each individual student, not student equivalents. And when you look at what the impact of that is, you'll find that if their figure is that, the figure that they provided in the methodology, the 14 million, you're talking over 13,000 kindergarten students would be impacted. So although it's ambiguous, I shouldn't say ambiguous, although we haven't quite gotten it yet, I think because there is some ambiguity in it, it certainly seems as if the intent is to fund those full-time students, those full-time kindergartners. You'll see that their intent is they're estimating 14 million, and you're talking 13,000 plus students, and in 16 we had 12,000.
Well, the Department of Education is going to be the entity that's going to authorize the release of those funds. If they give you a ruling that says that they're going to pay this, then that's what I know I would count as that's sufficient evidence to say included in our revenue. If they say otherwise, how can we support that? Or at least I couldn't. It's revenue that we're hoping to get, and I encourage you to apply for it, but it's not something that I would count on and saying it's budgeted money to reduce our budget. It's
If you
just-
want to take it out, please take it out, but do not come back to this board and accuse us, if we end up with this revenue, of building in surplus. It seems to me relatively clear that we fund
No.
a full-time
I'll
kindergarten
turn around and
program.
I'll be the first one to commend you and congratulate you on getting this. It's just that right now, I don't think there's enough evidence to say that we were going to get this money. I would say the Department of Education should give you a definitive answer. I mean, it should have already been given it to us. You asked a question, and they're still looking into it, so that they even have some questions on it. So
No, you
until we get that,
You get different answers every time you ask, and we're not the only district. There are other districts that is full tuitioned, and memos went out, or letters went out to people saying, we're giving you $1,100 back next year on your tuition. Whoops, maybe not. So
until that money gets deposited into our TD bank account, that's when I says it's been recognized.
Yeah.
Until then, it's great to have.
On that note,
now the good news.
well, no, it's not such good news. It's conditional good news, perhaps. Conditional good news. Good news in quotes. Tom Geary, who works in my department, our business operations coordinator, had been applying, and as had been discussed, under the State of New Hampshire Public Infrastructure Fund for certain projects that we had that were quote-unquote shovel-ready, that we have planned, and we have been conditionally, which means that we can't really include it in revenue because we haven't gotten it yet, conditionally awarded $79,220, which is 80% of the total proposed project cost of $99,025, which relates to miscellaneous main entry security improvements and the replacement of a fire panel. So I'll put that out there for consideration. I have letters. The letters say conditional for your budgeting purposes, but to your point, until we get the money, we probably shouldn't budget it. I'll put it out there.
I would agree with that. Until we've met all the conditions, and they say that it's been awarded to you, it's still, if we don't meet the conditions, that revenue, that's not gonna come in.
It's really the pleasure of the board, however you want to do it.
I could almost argue it on the other side.
No, you can, and that's fine.
The revenue budget is a forecast.
It is.
It's an anticipation, just like our expense budget. It's an anticipation. There's no guarantee we're gonna spend it, either under or over. On the revenue side, it's the same thing, and I think the revenue is even more of a variable.
What has been, excuse me, the past practice with respect of having it on the revenue side and have something not come in?
We make adjustments mid-year to correct that. But typically, I think the district as a whole has tried to be very conservative.
And then at the end of the year, when you do your MS 22 and 23, that is where that is
Yeah, you've
generated?
Well, you've been around for some
Yeah.
time, and I know Michael's been around, and to quote Mr. Stokager from years past, a little discretion. So he would always give you a number, and he'd say a little discretion, meaning that number could move.
That's what I'm trying to get at. It doesn't harm us to put that number in there. And then at the end of the year is really when you find the money, but then at the end of the year, it comes out that there's zero amount in that revenue side.
Yeah. And then he has to make adjustments to make the bottom line work. So you're right, it could be argued either way. It really could.
Any other comments or questions on this?
Only thing I would say is, at probably the next board, when they're elected, they should create a policy, and that's just how we should do it. Like, unless there's some extremely odd reason, so we're always sort of, like, some of those things should be, this is just how we do it.
Makes comparing year to year a lot easier.
It does, and then we don't have to spend 10 minutes figuring out whether we include these things or not.
This wouldn't really follow in policy.
All right, I'd like to move the question. Any other comments? Let's do a roll call vote again, please.
Can you read the motion again?
Yeah, read the
I really don't know what
motion.
the impact is gonna be. No, so say we take it out, what's that, what are we doing? I mean, because as Mr. Doobie says, it's really kind of an estimation, it's a budget process, we really don't know exactly what's gonna be expended or not.
We're trying to
So
give
I
a
guess-
better,
I guess I'm just trying to find what the point of doing it is. I mean,
John's trying to get the most accurate bill the assessment, what the bills are to the towns. That's what he's
This
trying
is
to
the first year it's been offered, and we're assuming we're getting it. We have no history that we have
We've got
gotten
it.
this in the past, so.
if we get it this year, I mean, this coming year, if we're doing this again next year, then I would say that, yeah, you
Okay,
can
you see-
easily
you see
count on it,
track
because we've
record,
gotten it.
Perhaps.
When the Department of Education can't answer a question specifically and pointedly, that's question to be alarmed.
The more accurate, to state the obvious, the more accurate the revenue budget is, the more accurate the
Everything is.
predicting what the taxes are going to be.
Everything, it's a domino effect.
So,
Jeff, just from a budgetary point, if you left $1 in it, does that kind of react the way that line items do on the expenditure side, or you just leave it zero?
I could never refuse revenue because we don't have it budgeted.
What I'm saying is,
got the line,
if it's
you
zero.
We would have a serious talk with that
And you
one,
get the
man.
check sent to TD Bank for the 123,000, whatever it's going to be, and you're zero in your account, you're not gonna turn the money down.
No, just be unanticipated revenue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want everyone else to understand that you can ascertain and receive unintended
Okay.
money.
Any other comments or questions? Right. If the clerk would read the motion again, please?
Motion to remove $123,000 from the revenue budget.
Great. Call roll, please.
Yes.
Mr. David? Mrs. Doobie?
Yes.
Mr. Doobie?
Yes.
Mr. Gurns?
No.
Mr. Guide?
Yes.
Mrs. Hammond?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Mascola?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Paul?
Yes.
9-1.
All right.
now, do you want a new number on the revenue budget that you can vote on?
In a minute.
Okay, sorry.
Jeff, what was the language around the conditional approval, and I guess if you could tell me that, then I may have a follow-up.
See? Now it's like Georgie's got the binder now.
Well, I wanna understand the process around the grant.
Yeah.
You can tell I pulled something electronically despite the abundance of paper. Very pleased to inform you of recent application of the Public School Infrastructure Fund, RSA 19815-Y, for main entry security improvements. This is just one sample. They're pretty much identical. Has been favorably recommended in the amount of $10,400 by the Public School Infrastructure Fund Commission, and I have approved it. This amount reflects 80% of the amount of your total project costs. Earlier this year, it goes on to explain how they established the fund. State expenditures of this nature must receive final approval by the General Court's Joint Fiscal Committee and Executive Council. However, you should know that I plan to personally appear before these bodies to advocate for final approval of your project. I wanted to bring this conditional approval to your attention to allow your district to prepare for town meeting, deliberative session, or in crafting your next school district budget. We anticipate the final approvals of the project will be complete by late January to early February. Remaining communication, yada, yada, yada. Sincerely, Christopher T. Sununu, Governor.
Okay, so this is, the next step was outlined there.
Mhm.
Do we have a sense of how often these conditional approvals are granted and then revoked?
No, I don't think, I don't know why you'd go through the trouble of trying to get this in time for the budget if there was some question about whether it would be approved or not. Why his office would get this in.
That's my sense too. And how much, what was the amount?
All in, a series of grants for different various projects that we had applied for.
Well, what's the 80% mark? Because that's what actually we would really get in the revenue.
Yeah.
Correct, so the award is 79,220 on total project costs of $99,025.
All right, so the amount we would probably want to add to the income
Just
would
the
be
79.
79, what was it again?
It's the 79,220.
So,
I'll make a motion that we increase the revenue budget by $79,220.
Second. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. Unanimous.
Now we'll go with that.
All right.
I'm just watching the school board, watching the clock and watching the school board.
We gotta get this.
I mean, if that's enough, we can, if you're okay with that budget, I can
Put it together for
put it
public
together
hearing.
for public hearing, and we at least know what the number is and where you stand. Great.
Mr. Guide, you said you had other income issues?
No.
You're all set.
No,
You have income issues?
did I? No.
motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. We will see everyone on next Thursday at 5.